Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective. And we're just gonna go right into it. Some of you are already familiar with the story of Dexter Taylor, a man in Brooklyn, New York, who was arrested in 2022 for building his own firearms. And we're gonna get a little bit into that. But a few days ago, just this week, he was convicted of several counts, and he is currently in Rikers. And we have Doni and I have his lawyer, Vinoo Varghese, who is representing Dexter and has been with him since the beginning. And we're just going to give a little bit of an update here. So welcome to the program, Vinoo.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. And thank you, Donnie.
No problem. So why don't we kind of just set the stage a bit, just for those who aren't familiar with the story? Can you just kind of give just a snapshot view of what's going on with Dexter?
So, as you mentioned, in April of 22, there was a joint ATF NYPD raid on his home in Brooklyn. He lived in a small apartment building, only 3 floors. And he had the first floor, the second floor, and there's a separate tenant on the 3rd floor. Dexter is a Renaissance man. He is a unique human being. I would call him a unicorn. He's just an incredible human being. Guy's just brilliant. He's one of those guys that if I went to high school with, I'd be like nerd, but I was like secretly I'd be jealous of him, right?
Right.
So he went to Stuyvesant High School, which is considered one of the best high schools in the country, if not the best. And I didn't get into Stuyvesant. I got into its competitor Bronx Science. I went to a Catholic all-boys school, but from there he went to Johns Hopkins. Bounced around a little bit. He then became an engineer, and he was a data engineer, a software engineer. Was working on a number of projects. Was doing very well financially. He had enough disposable income, as the DA pointed out during his trial, that in 20 and 21, he spent nearly $40,000 of money to purchase firearms it's legal to purchase these parts. And so he purchased these parts, and in his home, and he has a basement also. In his basement, he wanted to, during COVID lockdowns, thought about starting a new career as a gunsmith. He was fascinated by what's called weapons science, and he was building things for 2 years. He ended up building, I believe it was 8 pistols and 5 rifles, or 6 rifles, AR style rifles, and then 8 or 9 Glock pistols that he built. And as a testament to how good this guy is, they all worked. Now, they established, as one of the elements of a crime is that the DA must establish that the guns were operable. And so they test fired him, even though he himself had never test fired them with actual ammunition.
Wow.
He used what are called live caps. So
Right.
he had done live caps, and see, this is new stuff for me. I don't know this world. I used to be a prosecutor, so the only gun I held was when I was prosecuting somebody in the early 2000s for gun possession. I've been to a skeet shooting range and stuff. So anyway, when his family initially hired me, we saw him in Rikers when he was initially held, and it was about $250,000 bond. His parents ended up putting up the house, but he spent about a week in Rikers before he was released on bail. And then he hired my firm and me to represent him going forward. And let me give you a little background of the gun laws in New York. So there have always been gun laws, and in New York, as you know, and you guys probably have spoken about. I think I've seen some of your work, Jeff.
Yeah.
New York has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country. And in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court found that its licensing structure and how it gave out licensings to license pistols in New York City. So in New York City, the NYPD determines who can get a license, and
Right.
you had to show something called just cause, or something like you had to have a really compelling reason, like you're a juror, you're going to get robbed at gunpoint, you know, something like that in order to get a gun permit. So we in 2022 in the Bruin decision, the U.S. Supreme Court found New York City's, excuse me, licensing regime to be unconstitutional because it infringed upon the Second Amendment right to bear arms. New York State and New York City's reaction was predictable.
Yep.
They were angry. Governor Hochul, you know, talked about, you know, that this was a terrible decision by these conservatives, you know, these radicals in the Supreme Court, and
these gun nuts.
Mayor Adams, yeah, Mayor Adams said this was reckless and it would just make the city unsafe. There was so much rhetoric, and what they did was, because they had to change the laws, so they came up with a new thing, which was basically the same thing, disguised as a new thing. And so now they created a category. They had got rid of that compelling reason thing,
right,
to change it to good moral character. And so, you know, they ran your regular background checks, mental health checks, and then basically some, you know, guy who wasn't good enough to be a cop out on the street, who is now sitting behind a desk, but just a police officer gets to decide who's of good moral character. So during the trial, they had this guy, Officer Pagan, who's a complete clown, got up there a couple years on the force. And so in really important to know is that in 2019, one of the heads of this licensing division went to federal prison because it turned out that this guy was taking bribes, and so only his buddies and people who bribed him could get licenses.
Right.
So after Bruin, you had the legislative response of the governor and the mayor. Well, really, the governor, the mayor, just he's not the one who's making the laws. So,
right.
Though there are some city codes, that Dexter was also convicted of. So there was the legislative response, which was a change into this new good moral character, and that's what the NYPD followed. But there was also a judicial response. So to give you a little bit, and I can only speak, so I practice federally all over the country. And the reason I can practice federally all over the country is because it's the same law.
Okay.
It's the same criminal code. It's the United States code applies, and no matter what district, federal court you're in the country, and it's the same rules of evidence. There might be slight tweaking between, and you guys are in Louisiana, right?
Right.
So there might be some tweaking of little procedures here and there. There may be some, differences in how the middle appellate court, or we call it an intermediate appellate court, the courts of appeals that sits over Louisiana may interpret certain things a little differently than New York, the federal court that sits over New York, but it's the same law, right? It's the same rules of evidence and stuff. So things don't vary as widely as they do from state to state. So I have gone in occasionally on a state case, but I always have a local guy with me to deal with the procedure on a state case. But in federal court, I don't need a local guy. Right. Because same code, United States code, same federal rules of evidence. So what the judges here in New York State, and I know this happened. How do I know this happened? Because it came out, and what happened was they were given a bench brief. So a bench brief is somebody from the Office of Court Administration drafts a stock response to Bruin challenges, because they knew that you'd get a floodgate of litigation from criminal defendants challenging their gun convictions on Bruin grounds, saying that their right to possess firearms has been infringed by New York State in light of Bruin. The issue, though, there were two things. Well, first, let me explain what the judges did. So the judges get this bench brief, and they all, which is just a stock response and how you deal with these cases. So what they did is they rejected all of these people's application or their appeals and other things on the grounds, or I shouldn't say, this is in the trial court. They rejected every single one.
Wow.
Hundreds, if not thousands, of criminal defendants. Because remember, most people are represented by public defenders, not private lawyers like me. Right. So the vast majority, 95% of criminal defendants. So the public defender's offices did a decent job, right? In trying to combat it. So they all filed their Bruin challenges. And in fact, it's known in New York as a Bruin motion, right?
Oh, wow.
And they all got rejected all over the state. Thousands of these things, because the judges got together and they said that the defendants in these cases did not have standing to challenge this law. Okay. Standing means, so in order to have standing, it's a term of, it's a constitutional law term. And it means, and forgive me if you guys know, but I imagine there's people in your audience who don't know. Most people don't know this thing. Is that you have to, standing basically means you have the ability to challenge it. You have to be able to have an ability to challenge it. And they're saying you don't have the ability to challenge your grounds, your gun, charges against you because you never applied for a license. Now it's actually not a bad argument legally. And so it's a way to eliminate procedurally 99, actually 100% of all of these challenges, because you're saying you can't challenge it on constitutional grounds because you don't get there procedurally.
Right.
You got to be here at least in order to get up here. And they're saying you don't make it up here. So we knew that, right? I knew that. And I'm looking at this stuff and I'm like, all right, we know what the stock answer is going to be. How are we going to get around this for Dexter's case? Because Dexter also didn't apply for a license in New York State, right? And in New York State, and I've been hearing this, from different programs I've been on, they're like, it's, completely illegal to build your own firearms. Well, not in New York State, okay? Not under New York State law. So federally, you can make the argument there is a, ghost gun statute out there federally, so it's a little bit of a different issue. But under state law, you have to register. There's things that process that you have to go through. So how are we going to overcome this standing objection, right? Well, there's federal case law out there. So this is where the intersection of state and federal law comes in. Like, they're parallel systems. Most people don't realize that. So the United States Supreme Court cannot tell the Louisiana Supreme Court what to do on a state law issue. It can only tell the courts in Louisiana, or in my state, New York, if it involves federal law. So, of course, we raised a Second Amendment challenge, right, which is federal. But what we said is, if we can show, so there's law out there that says you don't have to establish standing if applying for a license would have been futile, would have been useless.
Right.
And so what we needed,
I remember we talked
data,
about that.
Right? So I got it. I did a FOIL request, a Freedom of Information Law request on the NYPD to see how many applications came in and how many they granted. So I filed it on them in November of 22, and they told us we wouldn't get an answer until April of 23. So, and even then we didn't get it for another 2 months, but then we got it. I actually sent one of my people down to One Police Plaza, and like I said, I told my my legal assistant, I was like, if you come back without the records, don't come back at all. So some people think I'm a horrible boss, but we need to get these records, right? And they've been dilly-dallying. So she came back with the records and saved her job. So the records now, they gave it to us. It was like 1,000 pages of like raw data. And we're like, how do we do this? Well, Dexter is a software engineer.
Yep.
So Dexter put that into his coded it, figured it out. As I said, like Dexter could be an expert witness for me in another case, right? Like, that's how amazing he is. So he figures it out, puts it in an open source, so it's out there for anybody to access. And we put that into our papers, and we showed that in 2021, before Bruin, the NYPD only granted 19% of applications that were for permit uses, so individual pistol licenses. In 2022, they only granted the second year that Dexter, and those 2 years are important because those were 2 years that Dexter was buying parts.
Right.
In 2022, they only granted 4%. So even after Bruin, the entire year, only 4% of applications granted.
Yeah, so it went down after the Bruin decision.
Yep, correct.
And the thing about this data, though,
I want to go back a little bit.
When
you're talking about the
technical, so please jump in and ask questions. I'm happy.
When you were discussing the judges, by the way, and you're talking about how they all came together, that sounds like conspiring to me. I don't see where the federal government hasn't come in and done anything. I mean, again, as you know, how Jeff and I are libertarians, it's a really big issue for us to sit there and watch a government not hold itself accountable. And then as people, it seems like we're hopeless. This is arbitrary. It's just like, if we go back in time in history and look at the Black Code laws and look at all these other laws that have passed, and people just have to just deal with it. I mean, we have attorneys, but like, what are people need to do at this point? Because when judges are coming together and saying, hey, we're going to ignore the Constitution and we're going to just throw people in a cage. What are we supposed to do with that? What's next?
I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't have an answer for you except doing what you guys are doing and casting light on this stuff, right? Because I can only argue in court, and I can argue in the court of public opinion, but it has to be enough of an issue that people really care, and sadly, just judging by the verdict, which I'll get to and we'll talk about, people just didn't care, right? And so,
and these judges are not voted for, correct? These judges,
no, they are. A lot of them are. A lot of them are appointed. A lot of them are voted. So the judge that we were in front of, the three judges that we were in front of, first was an Asian woman, then a white woman, and then finally a Black woman. And there's no doubt in my mind that this case was sent to her for trial to counteract the optics of the prosecution, right? It was a white prosecutor, a white judge. We got sent to the only Black female judge in that courthouse. Okay.
Of course.
So we got sent to her. She was, of course, available to try this case because the white judge was engaged. She had another matter to deal with, even though she's the one who wrote the decision denying our motion, right? So I just want to finish up, and Donnie, I want to get to your question. It's an important question. So we established that it would have been useless. We made our constitutional arguments, and of course it was rejected, right? Which we anticipated, right? And it's like a joke of a decision, the response, but we threw them off a little bit because we had numbers. Right. And how they said is that, well, Dexter can't be his own expert. And interestingly enough, we didn't put him as an expert, and we had the code available for public consumption. Mm-hmm. The DA's response to Dexter's papers were fascinating. It wasn't what I expected. Mm-hmm. What they didn't do, they have their stock response, their cut and paste job. So these judges have a cut and paste job to respond to these motions. The DAs also have their cut and paste job, which mirrors what the judges do. So what they said is Dexter should have applied because he is of good moral character and would have gotten a license if he had applied, right? So
that is insane. That is a total lie. They know that he would have been rejected. Everybody knows that New York City and New York do not want.
How the 4%?
Yeah, the 4%. It went down after the Bruin decision. Like how that is a bald-faced lie.
Well, it was a compliment. Right? It was kind of a compliment to Dexter's character coming from
it was a slap in the face compliment.
Yeah, I mean, it's correct. The second thing that they did was the DA did not dispute the numbers. They just said, we don't necessarily accept the numbers, but didn't analyze the data on its own and said, no, Dexter's numbers are wrong. So they basically conceded Dexter's numbers, but said he should have applied because he would have gotten a license had he applied. So he can't make this argument that he wouldn't have gotten a license. So it was clever. I have to give them credit. right? So the ADA who did the case, and obviously he's getting help from his superiors. And I know the appeals bureau in that office. I used to be in that office. I did appeals. You know, the guy that the head of appeals, I'm sure he wrote the response. He went to Yale Law School. He's a very smart, book smart guy, right? So it was interesting. We got rejected. So then, but for trial, we got sent to this Black woman who was like, the first 2 days, I was like, the first two judges we had were just nasty, right? And this is the thing, like, I mentioned that I'm in federal courts all around the country. Like, judges know who I am. I get treated with respect because in federal court, these judges like good lawyering and they love their criminal cases because their dockets are overwhelmed with civil cases. And a lot of them are ex-prosecutors, and it's okay because they're like, they will hold the government to a high standard, but then usually just, you know, they'll entertain us to an extent, right?
Right.
But in state court, you're a good lawyer, you make smart arguments. These guys are overwhelmingly political hacks, right? And so there's a huge difference in quality between a federal judge and a state judge, right? There are exceptions, don't get me wrong, but we didn't have any of the exceptions, unfortunately, for Dexter. And first judge was a complete hack. And I had issues with her before. And so she soft recused herself because I challenged her and I said, she kept trying to make Dexter go to trial. And I said, we don't have the data from the NYPD.
Right.
How can I need to this constitutional argument? She kept rolling her eyes and all this stuff. And so I threatened her. I threatened her to report her. She's a mayoral appointee. So some judges are elected and they sit in what's called, in New York, Supreme Court is not the highest court. So New York does it backwards. The Supreme Court just means trial court, felony
Okay.
trial court. So so I sent her an email. I said, listen, if you threaten my client again with incarceration, trying to force him to trial before he can make a defense, I'm going to write to the mayor's committee the next time you're up for appointment in 2 years and tell them what you're doing. You know, and this continued. I had another case with her and she was just, you know, she jumped all over those clients' rights. So then it got reassigned to a new judge. I didn't make a motion for her to get off the case, but it got reassigned to a new judge who was also another hack, right? And she's the one who wrote the decision. That was that white judge. First judge was Asian American. Then for trial, it magically gets to this woman who was pleasant for the first 2 days. She was just like, you know, because I think she was like, all right, you know, she seemed like whatever. I had never had a matter with her before. And then something happened. And so this goes to your question, Donnie, what do we do, right? She clearly got a call. This judge, you can look her up, Abena, Abena, H, last name is Darkeh, Darkeh. She's half African from Ghana and half Caribbean from one of the islands, Caribbean islands. And she's married to the DA's biggest fundraiser, the DA of Brooklyn, biggest fundraiser, who I know, who I like, you know, whatever. I didn't know they were married. I had no idea. It's like kind of crazy. So, because I never dealt with her, I'd never seen her, you know. So, you know, I'm more in federal court, even though I come from that office. So, like, I know exactly what happened because by day 3 of the case, she completely changed and got nasty, started interfering in everything. When we finally picked a jury, she had, you know, it was interrupting my opening because the reality was the only way we were going to win at trial, because she told us, do not bring the Second Amendment into this courtroom. It doesn't exist here, you know? So you can't argue Second Amendment. This is New York, you know, I know you're trying to get to federal court, you know, but you're not allowed to. I was like, look, if we can win, we're going to win here, Judge. He doesn't want to go to prison. He's not going to prison for no reason. He's willing to go if he has to, but he's not trying to go to prison, right?
Yeah, of course.
So if you got to let us make our arguments. And, you know, I filed all the things to preserve these arguments for appeal. She rejected these arguments and she went out of her way to limit me. And so even before we got to trial, a month before we were scheduled for trial, this ADA, O'Rourke, who was a white guy, he was a gentleman. You know, I had no issues with him. He was bright. A month before we go to trial, all of a sudden he's replaced. and a black ADA takes over the case. Had nothing to do with the case.
So let me ask you this.
And
what,
so, yeah.
Let me ask you this. And I know you're not psychic. You can't read minds. What do you think happened between the time period when Judge Darkay was being nice judge and when she turned into Mr. Hyde?
She got I'm sure her husband got a call from the DA because they're checking in every day because this was a big case for the DA's office, and it's certainly being watched, and you guys and he started generating a lot of following. And also, it's a unique case. All those other defendants that challenged this on brewing grounds were most of them were street thugs. I mean, who were out on the street carrying guns, got stopped. They weren't people like Dexter. And so they're not guys who are building guns in their own home. You know, if they were trying to sell them. You know what I'm saying? Like, so Dexter's case is unique because it's certainly he's building guns in his own home. It's really well within the meaning of the Second Amendment, right? He's not out there taking them out onto the streets,
right?
You know, trying to do something with them, whereas everybody else was either using them on the street or, you know, were involved in other, like, all those cases are involved. You know, it wasn't a straight gun, so they weren't guys who were just carrying for their own protection.
Sure.
Right? They're guys who had guns and priors and other stuff, who were doing stuff. So
yeah, those are easier to prosecute.
Case.
Yeah.
Right. They knew this was a unique case, and it had attracted attention. Plus, you know, I went on a couple shows, and especially we were on Newsmax. You know, so it got a little bit of attention. You guys did wonderful promoting Dexter. So they were watching every single podcast of his, because every single day that prosecutor got up in court and said, "Judge, here's another thing Mr. Taylor and his lawyer said," you know, and we're like trying to shut us down. And here, Judge Darkay couldn't do anything about it because, you know, a criminal defendant has a First Amendment right. This isn't Donald Trump, right? Who's, you know, now, and Donald Trump's gag orders are limited. You guys got to understand that. It's limited to, like, don't insult people, basically. There's no insult there. Like, the judge didn't put a gag order on him to criticize the judge. He said, you can criticize me all we want, you know, but stop telling me that my daughter is, you know, like this. You know, for gag orders, it's a relatively reasonable gag order, but Trump is Trump, right? That's not the situation here.
Right.
That's, he's just speaking, and there's also, as far as lawyers go, there is a U.S. Supreme Court case on this that you know, that where a lawyer in Nevada, they try to take away his license because they didn't like what he was saying on a criminal case, and the U.S. Supreme Court said back in 1991 that a criminal defense attorney's duties don't just are only in the courtroom, but also in the court of public defense of opinion. And an attorney has a duty to defend his client, not only in court, but in the court of public opinion.
Sure.
And Darkay couldn't argue with that. And so she never agreed. But what it did was also, because I said these things about her too, right? I don't care. I mean, I'm not worried, you know, like, you know, I've had the DA in the U.S. Attorney's office come after me in one way or another in my career. So I'm like, bring it on. You know, I'm too old for this shit. Am I allowed to say that on your show?
Yes,
you know?
That's fine.
I'm not sure
you can quote Danny Glover. That's fine.
You know? Yeah, I'm too old for this shit. So no one's going to intimidate me. I've been doing this for 25 years, right? So, and I call it like it is, you know? And they know that, and the DA knows that. The DA and I used to work together. You know, Eric Gonzalez is a nice guy, you know, but he's a politician now, you know. So he was a cool guy, you know, when I was in the office with him. But you know, he's older than me, you know. So, you know, what happened, Jeff? She got a call. The DA called her husband. Now, do I have proof of this? Absolutely not. But it was exactly what you just said. A Jekyll and Hyde. She was responsible. She was respectful. And I was like, wow, what a Finally, Dexter's getting a fair shot. That lasted for 2 days.
Mm.
And this is a trial that went over 5 weeks.
Yeah, so it
You
sounds
know?
like there are a lot of machinations behind the scenes. I mean, even from switching it from the Asian
Yeah.
judge to the white judge, from the white judge to the black judge, from the black judge being
Well,
nice.
I forced her off the case, the Asian judge, because
Oh, okay.
I threatened her.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
That's that.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. Okay.
I knew that was
That
gonna
part
happen.
was your doing, but the other two weren't. Yeah.
Yeah,
So were
yeah.
all the judges women?
Yes.
Okay, all judges were women. Interesting. Very interesting. And my other thing is I've been doing some digging into the judge and doing some research. I looked where she went to college. The college she went to seems very anti-gun, very much so pro-gun control. Don't ask me how to pronounce the name of the college. I told Jeff the name. I can't pronounce it.
Oh,
But,
no. She went to I think she went to Georgetown for college.
Well,
And then
this
she
for
went to law school at
school.
Hofstra. Hofstra Law.
Yes.
Hofstra, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I'm
yeah.
talking about.
Hofstra's a
Them.
very well respected law school. You know, it's in New York, Long Island. You know.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I saw it was interesting. They had a lot of gun control stuff. You look their name
Oh,
up in
I
gun
didn't
control.
know.
It's
I didn't know.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
I mean,
did my digging.
Yeah. So Donnie, let me
And then I
just
also
say,
thought was
she's a New
interesting-
York Democrat. What you know, said right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. I know some other New York Democrats. They're not like anti-gun, so it's just like meeting different peoples. I have to like learn. I'm still looking at her as an individual. I'm like looking at her where her father came to America to go to Columbia University and to work for the UN. I thought it was very strange, and he met his wife at a UN party. I feel like that's really
on
kind of
her
strange
bio.
how that works
I read
out.
that. Yeah. Because I was like, who is this lady? I never,
Very
you know.
weird.
Yeah.
So
But then I saw someone else got basically a house arrest for bringing in marijuana to the jail. There was like $6,000 worth of marijuana, and they were bringing in marijuana in another case she had, and then they just got basically like house arrest. And then on the federal level, he got in trouble. But with her, she was lenient with that. I guess she's lenient with marijuana stuff.
Because
and
marijuana
not
has
people
been
being able to
very
have firearms.
decriminalized. Yeah, marijuana has been mostly decriminalized in New York. And also the district attorney has gone on politically and made a decision to almost prosecute nothing marijuana wise in New York State.
Right.
So that's
which is
been
fine.
a decision of the New York City DAs. They are going back and overturning a lot of
Mhm.
old convictions, allowing a lot of things to be seen, because that's a good PR thing for him to do, right?
Right, of
Most
course.
people can agree that, I mean, New York was one of the worst states. I mean, New York is not progressive at all when it comes to criminal law. So New York, it needed to catch up to other states. And so these DAs have jumped on this progressive bandwagon of trying to be, easier on marijuana stuff.
So I want to
Well, the thing was with this
oh.
one though, he worked for the government, and he went to the jail and brought weed and did bribery and was selling weed to the inmates and stuff. That if that was lenient, that's interesting. And but he did get in trouble federally though. State level, it was kind of like lenient.
Yeah.
Of course. So I want to pivot back to the trial itself. I mean, because the things that you and Dexter told us were pretty egregious. I mean, and we just talked about just the stuff you guys went through with the judge. But can you kind of walk us through the trial itself and what you saw and what you noticed, how you were treated, how Dexter was treated? Just lay it out.
I mean, it got frustrating, and this is why that, I come from the state court system, and I mentioned this earlier. I walk in the federal court, and I just get treated with such respect, right? And because these judges are smart, they're highly, and they respect good lawyering. It's the opposite in state court. In state court, you walk in, the smarter you are, the more you're shitted on, because they expect you to play ball, and I don't play ball. Right. So, and Dexter wasn't going to play ball. Right. So you had a lawyer who doesn't play ball and a client who doesn't play ball. Right. And Dexter told me under no circumstances is he going to take any plea. Right. As a criminal defense lawyer, they make me a plea offer. I'm constitutionally bound to convey that offer to the client. I must convey. It would be unethical for me not to convey each and every single offer they made. So they only made one offer the entire time, and that was to 8 years to Dexter, and he obviously wasn't going to take that. I tried exploring, and I'll get to the trial, Jeff, but I just want to give you a little background.
Sure.
From the beginning, we were just treated with such disrespect. And, and that was my old turf, right? I mean, I was there from 2000 to 2006, sitting at the opposite table. So, and like I said, the DA was there when I was there, so a lot of the old supervisors are people that I know. The new younger ADAs, I don't really know them because they're new and they're young, right? So, this kid, who had became the lead prosecutor, I think he'd been in the office like 8 or 9 years, which is a long time. Most people, if you don't make a jump between 3 and 5 years, that means you're pretty much a lifer. So I left at 5.5 years, right? So the trial, as I said, the first 2 days, jury selection was broken up because it took us way longer to get a jury in Dexter's case than Donald Trump did. He got it in like 2 or 3 days. It took us over the course of 2 weeks to get a jury. And because there were interruptions, there were some problems, it was also Good Friday and then Easter and stuff. So we had 2 days that messed with jury selection. And also because I was getting all these jurors struck for what's called cause, because I could demonstrate that they weren't going to be fair and impartial. And for the first, we had basically 3 full days of jury selection spread out over 2 weeks. The first 2 days, she was a pleasure. And I was like, wow, we may get a real shot, even though she said she wasn't going to allow any Second Amendment. She actually said it nicely in the beginning, right?
It's always interesting when they violate your rights nicely.
Well, like, they should be courteous. They're like, counselor, I appreciate your arguments. It was a federal court. That's how she said it, and then all of a sudden it changed. And then I was like, because I'm always courteous and deferential until you stop being courteous and respectful to me, right? And then I don't care who you are, federal judge, state judge, we're going to go to war. I'm not here to make nice with you. I'm here to defend my client. So it changed dramatically. And that from that point forward, it was utter hostility. And she interrupted my opening statement. And all I said was, they're instructed the jurors that 12 of you are the 12 judges of facts. And I'm the judge of the law, right? That's the instruction they get, right? You decide the facts, I get the law, and that you must follow the law but you determine, facts, and you decide how to vote. So all I said is, there are 13 co-equal judges in this room, right? No one can show you. She interrupts me and says, please come in the back. I'm like 2 sentences into my fucking opening, right? And I didn't interrupt the prosecutor once. They get to go first.
Right.
And they had an interesting opening. They basically said that, Dexter was, I was like, the way that they have to handle this case properly so they don't get into any sort of appellate trouble. But aside the Second Amendment issue, there are due process rights that a criminal defendant has. And one of the things is that you don't start making all these inferences that don't exist. So he's charged with straight possession. And so during jury selection, they got out there and said, there's no victim here. Smart thing to do, right? This is a straight possession case. He didn't have a license. Under New York law, it's illegal to do. He opens up. There was the other prosecutor. This was a second prosecutor that was brand new to his case. He was white. He opens up and he says that, Mr. Taylor had a parade of horror. He was building this horrible place. And when they saw this horror that he was making under the noses of his neighbors, because all of those guns intended to hit their targets, basically implying that he was going to do some harm with these things, which, by the way, was not how they dealt with jury selection. There's no harm here. There's no allegation of violence. So I got up and I said, you're going to learn what Dexter is, who he is. You're going to learn that he never fired these guns and stuff. So, but when I said that thing, she addressed me, go in the back. And I said, this is outrageous. I like screamed in the back because don't interrupt me, right? I'm not doing anything improper. And then she did it again. So right from the get-go, and here's the problem that I was concerned about. You had 8 Black women on the jury, right?
Mhm.
8 Black women plus 9 women in total. The 9th woman was a Latina, okay? 2 Jewish guys and a 3rd Latino guy, right?
Mhm.
So the jury is heavily women, heavily Black women. And you have a Black judge. And that's who we ended up with as a jury. And, you know, a lot of them were, you know, they had Caribbean roots, and Dexter's, I think he felt, okay, they'll give him a shot. He has Caribbean roots as well. But clearly they identified with her, the
Yeah.
judge, right? Because, I mean, she clearly showed whose side she was on.
Mhm.
She was the toughest prosecutor in the room. She was way tougher than these 2, guys.
Wow.
Okay, because they weren't over the top, right? It was like, and I even said to them at one point, they're just doing their job. I have nothing against them, whatever. I wasn't going to make my comments about him,
Right.
being put on the case for optics. I had never said anything like that to the jury, and I never said anything about the judge being assigned the case because of optics, right? To
Right.
neutralize the race issue by having a Black prosecutor and a Black judge. This isn't the first time this has happened to me. Anytime I have a minority defendant, they will throw on a prosecutor who's of that race, to even if but this was interesting because they completely replaced the lead prosecutor, the only prosecutor on the case, with 2 new prosecutors, and the lead prosecutor became, this young Black guy, so, I mean, it was just, I was like, man, that's ballsy. So
That's very progressive
but
of them.
not the first time. Yes. So they clearly, were into her. And then the other thing, so I knew the only way we could have a chance to win, and it was a tiny shot, was for jury nullification. And if you guys understand that concept, which was that even though the defendant is guilty, in this case, Dexter's guilty, Dexter admitted everything, possessed these guns. His license was U.S. Constitution. He didn't have a license under New York state law. He admitted everything, and he was polite and kind. Is that they would look at this and say to myself, it's not right to put a guy like him behind bars. And so she tried to shut me down as much as she could. He was objecting like crazy during closing statements because, I said things like, with all the criminals running around New York City, this is who they want to put in jail. That's actually a legally improper argument for me to make. You're not allowed to talk about potential sentencing during a thing. But I got that in. The jury heard it. It didn't matter. It made no impact. I spoke to 2 of the jurors. I spoke to the Orthodox Jewish guy who ended up being like, he was like, he said to me, listen, man, if we're in trouble, we're going to hire you, but the law is the law. We had to follow the law. And I think there was something else. And then I spoke to one of those 7 out of 8 Black women walked. Like I saw them as they were leaving, and Dexter was already in custody. So this was like 6:30 p.m. outside. It's, it's light out. The weather was actually fairly nice. And they walked by, it looked like they didn't want to talk to me. But one of them came a little bit later. She spoke to me, and she was a Caribbean woman from Trinidad, just like Dexter. And she was like, the law is the law. He broke the law. And, I said, no, but you get to decide. I told her that. But I also realized the judge's instructions, I think, gave the impression that if they didn't do what she wanted, that they'd get in trouble.
Right.
So there is real coercion at the thing. And so this goes to, because she said, you must follow the law.
So wait, so let me just,
which is, she's allowed to give that instruction. Yep.
Yeah. So basically she gave the jury the impression that if they believe that Dexter broke this law, even if they disagree with the law, even if they think that the law is unconstitutional, even if they think that Dexter didn't actually do
Correct.
anything wrong, they still have to vote to
Correct.
convict, and gave them the impression that they could possibly face consequences if they don't.
You just summarized everything to a T.
Yeah, because when you told me that the first time, I even looked it up, is jury nullification illegal in New York? And I couldn't find anything. But it's like, what kind of consequences would they face? But that's my brain, who knows about this stuff. The average juror wouldn't know that they can't really do anything to you if you vote a certain way on a jury.
Let me tell you, it's even worse, Jeff. And so the question of whether jury nullification, I actually argued that jury nullification is allowed, because there is some laws from the High Court of New York that talks about lawyers who've made jury nullification arguments, and basically they said that, you know, judges shouldn't encourage it, but they can't prevent it. You know? So I actually made a pitch directly to Judge Darkey to allow me to argue jury nullification. She, of course, rejected that. So that creates another appellate issue. That's a state court appellate issue separate from the Second Amendment federal issue. So there's more to that, exactly what you said, because at the end of each day, before they go home, remember, they're not sequestered, right? So they go home. And she gives certain warnings to them. They call them admonishments. Don't research this case. Don't form an opinion about this case. Don't discuss this case. If there is a violation, and this is the key language that she gave them every night, if there is a violation of these rules, there will be serious consequences. So you hear that statement, then you're told you must follow the law. She basically said you must vote guilty without saying you must vote guilty.
See, and this is why she was the most aggressive prosecutor in the room. I like the way you put that, because what you're describing here is a judge acting as a prosecutor in a very subtle, manipulative way.
I would actually argue it wasn't so subtle.
Well,
yeah.
I have a question. How come we didn't go with the property right angle? You know, we have the right to acquire, possess. If they're going to use a possessive charge against him, why not possibly try, they won't use gun, why not use a property rights angle? Because you have a right to possess and own your own property, because you own yourself as a human being. You have a right to your own labor. Clearly he uses labor to purchase these different parts. And so he has a right to own property as a human being, because we're not supposed to be slaves in this country. So why not try? I mean, I figure this is so arbitrary. I understand maybe no argument could possibly work, but they say you can't bring up the Second Amendment. Why not bring up the property right angle?
So I did in papers, and we were precluded from arguing it. So part of it, to argue jury nullification. So this was tied into the whole jury nullification thing. I said I must be allowed to tell the jury that they can vote with their conscience, right? The must follow the law is an optional thing that judges are allowed to say. But I said under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Code, you can't deprive somebody of due process. Which is actually also in the New York State Constitution, where it actually specifically mentions property. But the Fifth Amendment federally is applied to the states through the 14th Amendment. So I said this is a separate argument from the Second Amendment case. I said that we must be allowed under the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, incorporated to the states under the Fourth Amendment, but also under the New York State Constitution. And I gave this section, I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but it says you can't deprive a person of property without due process of the law. Right. Well, here, if he can't argue Second Amendment, then you're depriving him of due process. So you have multiple amendment violations in here. But those are legal arguments. She said, she basically, told me to go fuck myself. And, she's like, without saying it, she's like, Dexter's going to jail. We all know this,
Wow. And
the thing about Dexter, this client, I mean, he said to me, he goes, Vinoo, don't sweat it, man. We knew that this was going to be the way it was going to be. And I said to him, before, and I can tell you how, it's emotional, and I've been fortunate. I've won most of my cases. But you never win every one case, and this isn't the first loss, it's always painful, right?
Sure.
But it's more painful when you have somebody like him, you know, who said to me, because I told him, listen, if there's a verdict today, that's what I'm worried about, is that quick verdict. That means they didn't give a shit, right? And it happened. I said the 4:55 p.m. verdict, right? Because you're supposed to leave at 5, right?
Yeah.
So we got the note. The note said 4:55 p.m. And I told him I'm worried about the 4:55 p.m. verdict. And there was a couple of notes they had before that about some of the definitions or whatever. And I was like, oh, that's not bad. Maybe we'll go into a second day. But then we got the note that recalls the verdict, and I told him, I said, look, here's what's going to happen. They're going to fill the room with court officers to prevent you from running, you know, or attacking anybody and stuff. And so they all kind of think. So it's this big fucking show, right? And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. He goes, just give my stuff. And then when the verdict, you know, was read, his mom started crying in the back. And he said to me, Vinoo, please comfort my mother. You know, and he and I are both very, I don't want to say this, but like, you know, we're both believers in Christianity. And you know, I'm like, you know, I'll give you an example. I took graduate religion courses in Christianity in college, you know, so, you know, it was sort of my second thing. And I'm also a world religion scholar. This is like a side thing. It's just always been something part of it. And Dexter and I connected on this level because he is such a Catholic. He's not Catholic. I think he's, what church did he go in? I can't remember. It's a Protestant church, but he's very Catholic in his thinking, and he put me onto a Catholic philosopher, right? And G.K. Chesterton, who I used in my summation, and he said to me, you know, comfort my mother. And that night it hit me, and I was saying this, Dexter's like Black Jesus, you know. He was like, son, go take care of, you know, to his apostle, go take care of my mother. And I I mean, at the cross, you know, St. John was there, and his mother was weeping, and he told, this is your mother, you know, this is your son, go take care of my mother. I was like, you know, it hit me. It was very emotional that night, you know? And, you know, I think, and it hit my paralegal as young, you know, kid, and we were just, all of us were, you know, emotional afterwards. But he was strong. He turned around to his mother after the jury was done. He said to his mom, God bless you, mom. Please don't worry. So when we were outside, I spoke to his mom and I said, your son is built from you. You know, so just, you know, he got his strength from you. The father was strong. You know, he was a strong dude, you know, and the mother, you know, she had a motherly reaction. And I said, but your son gets his strength from you, and he wants you to be strong. And he asked me to make sure that you were okay. And then she was good. And she goes, yeah, I know my son is a strong kid. So that's the human side of this, you know, that people don't see.
Well, and that's the thing about a lot of these cases. I mean, we always hear about injustices being done, but even in the political realm or in the legal realm, in a lot of ways, America has lost its humanity. And when you see a case like this, with it happening to a guy like Dexter, you can't help but to understand the humanity here. I mean, I was on the phone with him, I think on the day of. And Doni and I had talked to him like the week before, and our power had went out because of the storms and stuff. And so we're talking. We're talking about what's happening in the courtroom. He's like, "Yeah, so how did everything go with the power? Did everything come back on?" I'm like, "Dexter, the power doesn't matter. You're fighting for your freedom." But that's the kind of man he is. Like, he's facing prison time, but he was still concerned about Doni and I. He was still concerned about whether we're doing okay. And I'm like, "Yeah, we're fine. We're worried about you." But what you describe is who he is as a person, and he's probably one of the strongest persons I've ever met.
Same here. Here. I can say that without a doubt.
Yeah.
I will say this, I've been a lawyer for almost half my life, 25 years in September. And he is easily the strongest individual that I've come across in my career.
Wow. Wow. So what are the next steps now? I mean, I know he's in Rikers. I wanted to find out what are going to be the next steps in the process. I know we talked about this a little bit before, but what's going to happen next?
Yeah. So he's going to be sentenced in less than 4 weeks on May 13th. He's going to be sentenced. And I know this judge is going to make an example out of him, because the prosecutor made an argument in closing that was a relatively decent argument. Because Dexter Taylor thinks he's above the law. He thinks he can ignore the law. And so, of course, we couldn't argue that the law is the Second Amendment, right? He said, this is New York, you know? I mean, it came out in different ways, right?
Sure.
Even the juror, the one Caribbean woman I spoke to, was like, I said, he is following the law. She goes, I know it's Second Amendment, but every state has different rules. Every country has different rules. And there's only so much you can do with that, right?
Yeah.
So she's going to make an example out of him. He also knows, she also has been watching all these podcasts, because every day the prosecutor would send a link to a different one asking for a gag order, which she denied every day, but she admitted that she's watched these.
Mm-hmm.
So she didn't like what he said about her, and
I bet.
and she certainly didn't like what I've said about her, you know?
When she says, when they say Dexter thinks he's above the law, Dexter knows he's not supposed to be a slave. That's what it really is going on here. You're supposed to obey what we tell you. You didn't follow our rules, so now we're going to punish you because you didn't do what we said. We're not your slaves anymore. The thing is, that's what angers them so much, is because people say, you know what? I have a human right to have these rights. And it's crazy too, because there's a human right background for this judge as well. But with a human right to be able to defend yourself, to own and possess things, but you can't because the government tells you not to. You want to sit there and these people want to be like, oh, well, you think you're above the law. No, I know I'm a human being. I know I have these inalienable rights. And I have a right to pursue my happiness. I have a right to exercise those rights. But no, since you decided to do it, we're gonna make an example of you, so no one else, just like they did with the other, they're in slavery. Make an example out of the strongest one. Make an example out of these people, so that people are fearful of being free.
Yeah, they're the ones who actually think that they're above the law, because they're the ones violating rights given to us by our creator that are inherent. So by violating them, they are putting themselves above the law. It's projection, and they don't even realize it.
That's right.
I agree.
I think they do. And they're proud of it too.
Yeah. So I know that the appeals process after the sentencing is going to start. Can you kind of just describe to the audience what that's going to look like? Because I know you guys are ready to fight to the end of this.
Right. So it's a long process. So the way that it works, in short, as I mentioned, there's the state and federal systems run parallel. So for him, the only place where I think he's got a real shot is in federal court. You can't just jump to federal court.
Right.
You have to go through the state court appellate process, which means go to the intermediate appellate court, which in New York is called the appellate division, because the case was from Brooklyn. It's in the second department. It's actually just a couple blocks away from the courthouse we were in. We have 100% chance of losing there. Okay, 100% chance. Then we got to seek permission to appeal to the New York State Court of Appeals. Less than, I think, 5% of applications are granted. So the High Court in New York only hears about 5% of the applications to, that seek to go there. So I would say we have maybe a 5% chance in New York's High Court. And I only say that because one of the judges in New York State, on the highest court in New York, which sits in Albany, in a recent decision said that we have to start respecting Bruin, and dissented. It was a 6-1 decision against her on a series of cases from last fall, where they rejected all these Bruin cases on standing grounds that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
So, so maybe by the time Dexter gets, maybe she's convinced her colleagues to. I'd give it a 5% chance. So once we're done with that and we lose there in Albany, we then have to, then I can file a habeas motion, which is for the body habeas corpus motion, to go to the federal court, district court, the trial court. And I think our arguments have real legs there, because that's where they have to respect Bruin. You know, states will have to respect Bruin, but you got to litigate it, you know, and here. So if we lose there, or if we win there, the state will take an appeal to the intermediate appellate court, which now sits, and the federal side sits in Manhattan. And then depending on who wins or loses, we, you know, could end up in the US Supreme Court.
So that, yeah,
but that process could take years before, you know, I would say 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
Before we would know. So the Dexter is going to be, I would think Dexter's going to get a sentence of probably at least 10 years.
Wow.
Because she's going to set an example for him. It's a 3.5 year mandatory minimum on the top count. If you add up all the counts that he was convicted of, he could, and give their maximum sentences, he could face over 40 years.
Oh.
But I know we were talking about 18 years, but that's, you know, very worst case scenario. I would say this, if she gave him that sentence, that's going to be modified, right?
Right.
No one's gonna, even a state appellate court isn't going to allow that. So she's not that dumb, right?
Right.
So what she's going to say, she's going to give him something that sends a message, but will not be considered excessive. So I think 10 years is reasonable.
Okay.
Under her mentality.
Right, for her, yeah.
Okay, I'm not saying it's reasonable. It's
No,
not
I
reasonable
know.
for me. It's not reasonable
Yeah.
for Dexter. Okay.
Yeah, that
But
makes
that will
sense.
be deemed reasonable by an appellate court in terms of sentencing, because he had the arsenal of weapons. You know, he showed no remorse. He openly flouted New York's gun laws, you know?
So, okay. So, last question then, unless Doni, did you have another question?
No.
Okay. So, for the people watching this and for the people who are paying attention to this, and you've been very good about getting this in front of people. Dana Lash, shout out to Dana Lash, because she's been amazing with getting this case out there. She's not letting up on it. And I know there's some others too. What can people do to support Dexter as he's fighting this?
I hope, Jeff, just the give, send, go. That's where he needs all the help for this long, you know, I would say easily 3 to 5 year, maybe even 5 years, could be longer battle. And while he sits in prison, before it'll be over, you know, to give to get to a place where we have a shot at winning. We don't have a shot at winning in New York.
Okay.
So, but we have a shot at winning in federal court.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on with us and talking about this, and we'll be having you back on, because as this case progresses, there's going to be other updates. I know the sentencing is coming up, so there's going to be a lot to talk about. But Doni and I are going to do everything that we can to make sure that this stays in the public consciousness, to make sure that as many people know about this as possible. So, I mean, we're going to be fighting right along with you.
Appreciate that, guys. Really appreciate it.